Hey everybody, Pat and Doug here with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners, and this is our kickoff episode of 2026. So if you've been seeing episodes until now in the new year, man, that's the old stuff. We got some new stuff coming today. So let's talk about developing leaders in your facility because Doug, you are in the throes of opening location three, like as we speak, and that means more people and more important roles. So it seems like a timely topic. So kick us off here.
Yeah, I mean, obviously want to get your thoughts as well. I mean, leadership is, I know, one of your passions and decades of experience with that. So hopefully we can go back and forth on this one quite a bit. But I think developing leaders, where I would start with that, where I would like to start with that, is to understand first we got to have the mindset that if you want to grow your gym past, let's call it 300 grand a year, 250 grand a year. You're, 20 grand a month. You're gonna need people on the team that can help you. And specifically, probably, especially as we get, that 500K milestone that we talk about a lot in our coaching programs, the having a day-to-day leader there is very important. So I think there's kind of two angles we can take with this. The first one is like leadership in general, like making sure your staff, your coaches are all have good leadership qualities. But then, I do think each facility location does need a leader, whether you call them a manager or a head coach, that the title is not important. But having kind of that key person that is kind of the second in command to you so that you're not the bottleneck for everything. So that's my kind of overarching thoughts with leadership in this industry.
Yeah, I think that some of the things that I think about this are maybe I don't want to say summed up in like cliche type stuff, but it's a good kind of kicking off point. I mean, the mark of a good leader isn't to develop followers, right? It's to develop more leaders. And if we want to have more impact, if we want to grow this thing beyond our own shadow, I mean, I've talked with a number of people in the past month that are just, really trying to dial in on moving away from operator to more of an owner role or even a blended role. And, they have held on to this like I'm the only leader. There's nobody else here who can do what that I can do. And I think great leadership is empowering other people to to really carry on your vision. And that's the beauty of this is it is the owner. I mean, with Sperling Fitness, we'll use that as a pretty obvious example. With you, at some point, somebody else has to be the ambassador of your vision in each of these locations. And so your job is to infuse this vision, into them. They need to get it, they need to understand it, they need to be able to know how to express it through, standards, through the execution of systems. They need to kind of be the boots on the ground version of this. And I think that's what great leadership is being able to say, okay, this is the vision. How can I, empower these other people to go out there and not just serve a market, but, you know, be the torchbearer for this. And, I know that feels maybe a little bit abstract, and we can talk about the execution of this, but until you kind of accept that basic premise of, man, if this is all about me, then this thing can't grow beyond my own shadow. Until you move away from that and say, my job is to help grow other people, then you're kind of stuck. But when you accept that, then it just becomes like anything else that we do. It becomes the execution of a system. It becomes a process. So let's talk a little bit more about once you've accepted, like, hey, I want to grow past that 250, 300,000 mark. And I know I accept that I can't be everything. I can't be, this thing has to grow beyond me. What kind of process do do we need to execute?
So, when we're looking at identifying a leader, I think that's certainly step one. Before we can develop a leader, we got to identify a leader. There's a couple things that we personally look for. Number one is super strong communication. That's not, in my opinion, a skill that drastically can improve. It's kind of their default personality. Like, are they a strong communicator? Both in responsiveness, but also in, quality and, to some degree in their own version. Doesn't have, we don't want to create mini me's. Can they communicate, to your point, the vision? Can they communicate the standards? And you can teach that part, but just really good communication is a trait that they have to possess. That's, in my experience, not something that, grows in leaps and bounds. So really strong communication is one thing we look for. The other thing we look for, and these are kind of those innate skills that you can't teach. They either have it or they don't. Is the mindset of kind of ownership and decision making, right? So can they solve problems without you? And in the beginning, it's very small things. Like, for example, when they walk into the bathroom and it's dirty, do they just fix it themselves and clean it up, or do they just whine to you that the bathroom's dirty? Right? There's a difference of a mindset of a type of person that a strong leader is just going to do it, and frankly, sometimes not even tell you about it. And then same thing with decision making, right? As we move to development, you want to make sure that they can make decisions. I think that's probably the biggest mistake we can make is if we're developing a leader, they need to make decisions. They need to have ownership of both process, procedure, people, etc. And so if we're kind of treating them more as a, hey, you're going to have to come to me for everything, that doesn't really give them the ability to truly lead. So the first thing I would look for is, some of those communication, ownership, good decision-making skills that you just see early on when they first come onto your team. And then, small things that we will kind of test with a team member, for lack of better terms, is things like, having them with notice, of course, having them run a team meeting, right? So, hey, 2 weeks from now, I'd like you to run a team meeting, pick a topic, pick something that you think would be beneficial to the team. It's your meeting, run it how you want. And giving them that autonomy within a box, right? They have some time to prep, and those environments, because it's not in front of clients, it might be with two or three of your trainers. You can kind of see, can they command the room? Does the team listen to them? Meaning, are they engaged with them? Can they inspire change? Right? Some of those things that I'm looking for. I think the tactics are relatively straightforward. It's looking and identifying for the right person, and then putting them in those little micro environments where you can kind of test the waters.
Yeah, so really kind of paralleling what you just said, but maybe talking about it in, slightly different way. Like I think that when I've thought about leadership, it's always like people who seek responsibility rather than try to distance themselves from it, right? Like it's they want the responsibility. They want, and for those people, some people like the the potential rewards that come with taking more responsibility, and some people just like security of somebody else having the responsibility, or at least perceived security. um and the people who are going to be good at this, they always are people who want to take more responsibility for things. Uh, and I think that's just another way of saying ownership, right? Like taking ownership of things. Like, so if you find people who just inherently seek more responsibility and want, the consequences that come with that, that's a pretty good indicator. The other thing about this, and it's interesting that you talked about almost like this, like can find like test examples or opportunities. I've thought about that with with parenting for some time. Like, one of the great things about um moving into a neighborhood that, it's almost like this self-contained place where you're giving, a child more autonomy and more ability to make their own decisions and more responsibility, but there's still some guardrails on it, right? And then not too long ago, I was speaking with a gentleman, Dan Hefner, who I think, for my money, is probably the best college baseball coach in the country. Um, and he spoke a lot with me about leadership, and I know he studies it relentlessly. And they talked about, I mean, how do you develop great leaders? And they were talking about or he talked about some of the conversations he had had with service academy coaches and stuff. And it's like, man, you lead, right? You put people in leadership environments. And he said one of the best things they've done in their program is give every player the opportunity to be a leader in something. It might be a study table, it might be a project. And I think that if you want a safe environment to kind of test the waters with leaders, that's a powerful way to do it, right? You can put each of your coaches, each of your employees into an environment where they take the responsibility for leadership, and you're going to find out really quickly, like who wants this, who doesn't really want the responsibility, who takes charge, who's a problem solver, who can convey the vision of whatever the project or the task is to the other people in the group. So it's one of the simplest but smartest things that I think somebody can do when it comes to trying to grow their own leaders in house.
Yeah, agree. Um, and the next note I would make is I think a mistake that I would want to avoid is uh, tenure or length of employment does not equal leadership. That's a big mistake that I know, it's cliche, but corporate America is it's probably one of the biggest mistakes that corporate America makes is the longer you stay there, the more you make and the more fancier title you get. And, it creates this culture where the peers don't respect you because of your behaviors, because of your actions. You just have been there a while. And so in our industry, your leader, your head coach, your manager does not have to be the longest tenured person on your team. Sure, they may know the systems the best, they may know the tactics the best, but we had a case study example where our first location has been around for 14 years now, and in the first year I hired two coaches. Josh, who's now my business partner at the locations, and another coach, basically at the exact same time. And after, a couple of years, I started wanting to develop a leadership role. And this other coach really wanted it, like was very open about wanting that role. And going back to some of the personality skills, just was not a good fit. Great coach, like phenomenal coach on the floor with clients, just not a good, a lot of behaviors that the other team members didn't respect, and a lot of trust issues. Like I had some trust issues as far as timeliness and things like that. So all of those things, tenure, he was equivalent on, but not in some of the kind of innate things that a person has or doesn't have. So that's, I think, a big mistake we make in this industry is we just give the title to our longest tenured coach, and that doesn't necessarily mean that they're the best coach. So the last thing I would say with this is just to give you maybe end with some specific tactics. Once you kind of have your person, we talked about those kind of environments where you can test the waters, and continue to do that. Um, and then, there's I think a lot of things where you can start to put the spotlight on that person rather than you. So examples being, who communicates on if you do like a client memo or you do, your newsletters, if they're the ones writing those, if they're the ones communicating with clients in the beginning, you can proof them, you can oversee it before it goes out, you can kind of approve it. So it's again a controlled environment. Over time, you build trust where you don't need to approve those things. But what it does as the community is it puts that head coach or that manager as kind of the spotlight. Obviously, the team meetings to get the coaches and the rest of the team kind of looking at that person as the leader, and then making sure you have some type of weekly cadence with them as they continue to develop. Because eventually you're not going to be there every day, and you're not going to be able to see everything. So making sure you have a weekly cadence where you can, sit down at a routine scheduled time, just one-on-one with them. They can report on how the week went. They can report on people issues. You can troubleshoot things. You can kind of be a sounding board and kind of, lead them. But leading and developing leaders is a drastically different skill than developing an employee, right? Making sure people get stuff done is different than inspiring somebody to be the leader of a facility. So certainly not an overnight thing, but a necessary thing if you want to grow the gym to a certain size.
Well, and a couple of thoughts to consider when you're using the framework you just alluded to. The first thing is, I think we all have to understand that people are probably going to be bad at things before they're good at things. And so because it's our business, it sometimes it becomes that default setting to go in and rescue, right? Like to go in and say, well, I'm going to fix this. But the reality is, we probably weren't very good leaders when we started things out either, and we got practice, right? So you have to give somebody the reps, you have to give them that environment. Like I'm really fond of this idea. We want to set anybody up to succeed that is under our kind of umbrella, whether it's a client, employee, a developing leader. Setting them up to succeed doesn't mean that they're not going to have missteps along the way. It doesn't mean that they're not going to have struggles along the way. It means having some guardrails in place and some systems in place that, okay, after they do maybe stumble or have a misstep, how do we in that one-on-one environment go back, and it's almost like reviewing the tape, right? Like how do we correct this? How do we learn from it? Because it becomes very, I think, instinctual for us, because you hear owners all the time say, "This is my baby," right? They want to immediately jump in, and they're gonna take the reins. They're gonna correct something, and that one moment that somebody was running a team meeting that they didn't do it the way that maybe you'd have liked them to do it, that's not going to have any sort of meaningful adverse effect on the business long term. But your unwillingness to kind of let somebody take the reins, and you kind of undermining their authority, and being you know resistant to give them the opportunity to grow, that's the stuff that's going to hamper you long term. So it's okay if somebody, you know, they struggle a little bit. We just have to understand that our job's to develop them, and developing them, I mean, in some ways it's a little like parenting or something like that. Like you've got to let somebody, do some of the stuff themselves, and then give them, constructive feedback, and give them the tools to improve and get to where they want to go. But I think that if you use that kind of simple framework, or those ideas that you touched on, and let somebody run with it, that's how we're going to empower people. And the last thing I'll say is, I've been in leadership positions for 30 years now. I mean, I took over a college baseball program at age 23, and have kind of always been that role ever since. And I've made more mistakes than I'll ever be able to remember. And a lot of this is just you get repetitions and you learn. And if you have somebody on your side, a mentor, a guide, you get to learn faster. You get to improve quicker. So that gets to be the role that you play. And if you get good at this, the sky is often the limit as to how far you can grow your business.
Yep, for sure. And the last thing I would say is, you know, you've made it when the leader that you've developed uh, starts to call it their team.
Mhm.
You call your team, and in the beginning they'll say either our team or your business, or but when they start to take ownership and say my team, that's, it's always a great day because you never know when it's going to come. You could be sitting in a conversation and all of a sudden they say my team, and that little phrase there tells you that they've started to treat the people around them as being their leader, and inspiring them. So that's always a cool moment, and something that, is kind of without telling them, is the goal that I'm looking for.
Very nice. Well, hopefully, if you're watching or listening in, this is something you aspire to, because I know it's something we're excited about helping owners do is grow the business. So, past that kind of sticking point where everything is on their shoulders. And so this is a big step. And if we can ever help you develop your leadership skills or install systems to make leadership easier for you, just reach out and let us know. And that's Pat and Doug with another episode of the Wealthy Gym Owners.